Okay, you're all set.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Selectmen meeting February 8th, 2022, 6:30. All selectmen are present. I call the meeting to order at 6:31. Mr. Dennington, is there something you would like to share?
Yes, Madam Chair. I wanted to put on the record that on Monday, I filed a disclosure with the town clerk's office that in addition to being a selectman, I'm also an attorney at a firm in Boston called Con Cavanaugh. And I know Mr. Weishand's attorneys, Mark Smith and Payal Salzberg. There have been referrals between Con Cavanaugh and Laredo and Smith, Mr. Smith's firm, over the years. There are some current matters, I understand, where his firm and our firm represent separate clients in related matters, but I'm not involved with them. And there have also been cases where I have been adverse to clients represented by Laredo and Smith. So under Chapter 268A, I filed a disclosure to dispel any appearance of a conflict of interest, and I've attested that I feel that I can perform my official duties objectively and fairly, considering all the circumstances. Thank you. And I'd ask that just my disclosure be reflected in the minutes of the meeting.
All right, Mr. Dennington, thank you. Mr. Healy.
Yeah, I've got, it's not a 268A disclosure because there's no financial interest, but just as part of the record, Mr. Smith, who I understand is it may be appearing as part of this proceeding. He and I have known each other for 30 years, worked together for a couple of years back in the 90s, and his firm occasionally is adverse to the SEC, whether with witnesses or defendants. I don't think in any cases that I've handled directly, although I could be wrong about that, but certainly a lot of cases that I supervise. Again, not any sort of financial interest from a 268 standpoint, but I want to make it as part of the record.
Thank you, Mr. Healy. I'm sorry.
Ms. Chairman, to that same extent, I would like to disclose that Mark Smith's firm had represented my firm in the preparation of certain corporate documents. Again, I don't feel it's an issue, but for the purposes of the record, let it be known.
Great, thank you. Before we move to the executive session, I want to just address something that took place last night. So due to inconsistencies in comments made at the Historical Commission meeting last night by Mr. Weishand, and because it could impact our decision to enter into executive session, I wanted to take a minute and address 2 points. To allude that this discussion before us tonight was to influence an announcement of a potential run for selectmen by Mr. Weishand and Mr. Healy is nothing more than irresponsible and damaging untruths. This board was not privy to any of the findings nor my request for council to review until Friday, January 28th, and Mr. Weishand received the information on Monday, the 31st. By using his position on the Historical Commission under Chair's report as an avenue to make false accusations during a public meeting against this board and Mr. Healy specifically prior to tonight's meeting is at the very least questionable and troublesome on many levels. Excuse me. One other clarifying point is the public packet was not taken down at the request of Attorney Smith for erroneous materials. It was taken down when Attorney Smith expressed his client's request to rescind authorization for an open session meeting. Open meeting law requires that executive session documents are protected from public viewing until released. As members of this board may have viewed the historical meeting and discussion, I would like to ask Town Council Fedorov if the board needs to enter into executive session or we have the option to proceed in open session. Town Council.
Yes. So to the extent the board is desirous of having this discussion in open session, is perfectly permissible to have a posted executive session be discussed in open session. You can't do the converse, but you can choose and elect not to go into executive session, especially when the purpose of that executive session no longer exists.
Are there any questions? Mr. Healy?
Yeah, just from a waiver standpoint, if we make a determination to go into executive session, does that foreclose then proceeding in open session if there's no change in circumstance?
The option always exists to return to open session should you or should the chair of the Historic Commission wish to.
Great, thank you.
So a question on that, because our agenda is posted, not returning to open session, does that create an issue to go into executive and then come back out?
The way, it depends how you make the motion. So if you elect to go into executive session tonight and you expect to return to open session, you should make the motion in that way. To the extent you make the motion to adjourn out of executive session, adjourning the meeting, then you're obliged to not return to open session.
Okay. Does anyone else have question for council on this? I see none. Okay, so the board has a decision to make, obviously, whether to proceed into executive session or to move forward with the open session. And I think the easiest way to do this is, do I have a motion to enter into executive session for MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21, and not returning to open session to discuss the discipline or dismissal of or complaints or charges against a historical commission member, as the chair has determined that an open session meeting may have a detrimental effect on the town's position? Is there a motion?
Also
I'll make that
move.
motion. Nope,
Okay.
I'll second Sam's motion.
Okay, that being
Sorry,
said,
Ms. Brascia,
ahead.
did you just say that we would not return into open session?
that's how it's posted on the agenda. Attorney Federal, should I have read that differently? I read what was exactly posted on our agenda.
So I'm just looking on the participant list and I don't see the chair of the Historic Commission, Mr. Weishan, on this meeting, and he has the option to elect to go into open session. So I'm not sure
Okay.
how the Zoom works.
He is
okay,
there and has
so-
his hand up.
We certainly can bring him over. I had anticipated bringing them over after the board went into executive session, but we can certainly bring him over now. And he certainly has the option. If we could bring him and Mr. Smith, Attorney Smith, over as well. Good evening, Mr. Weishan.
Good evening. Is Mark
We-
here?
We are moving him over right now. Mr. Smith, I'm sorry, Attorney Smith, welcome. You are muted. Good evening, Attorney Smith.
Good evening, thank you.
There you are. Welcome.
Sorry.
Good evening. So I guess as a point of process, Kate, should I rescind my motion?
So to the extent you want to return to open session, I would leave that open and you can always then adjourn the meeting from open session. To the extent you don't want to and you want to go into executive session, you can just adjourn from executive session. But I want to make sure that you understand you're bound to adjourn the meeting from executive session if you word the motion that way. You can either amend the motion or rescind the motion and do it again to your liking.
Okay. So why
So
don't we,
I'll
Yes.
just, actually, you made the motion, Sam. So I mean, I think the simplest thing is just amend it, that we will return to open session. It's a simple matter just to adjourn from there. There's no other agenda.
I'll amend the motion accordingly.
And I will
Okay.
second the amended motion.
okay. Roll call.
We
Ms.
want to
Malinowski.
discuss it.
Discussion. Sorry,
Any
Sam.
discussion
Thank
on
you.
it?
Discussion. Mr. Smith, do you have any comments on the board or Mr. Weishan?
I have a quick
Going
statement.
into,
Yep.
regarding going into or out of executive session, Mr. Weishan?
Let me read my 2 sentences and you can judge. I'm represented by counsel today, Mr. Smith, who is here with us. I received notice of this meeting last week and was able to hire Mr. Smith's law firm this past Friday. My counsel is requesting a continuance of 2 weeks so that they can look into issues raised by town council and provide legal advice to me regarding these issues. My understanding is that Mr. Smith has been in touch with town council as of this morning to advise her of this request.
So the question, Attorney Smith, do you or your client have an objection? I guess that's the question.
Yeah.
I just want to word this right.
Right. So I guess what we need to understand from either Mr. Weishan or through his counsel, Mr. Smith, if he wants to elect to have this discussion, even relative to the continuance in open session, or is he reserving on his right to do so?
I'll leave that to my counsel.
I mean, we would prefer executive session, but I guess that's what our preference is.
Yeah, okay. So there's a motion and a second, so the board then should discuss whether or not it chooses to elect to go into executive session.
Executive session. Mr. Healy,
I'm just going to executive session. I mean, it's a reasonable request by Mr. Smith, who I've always found to be a reasonable man. So I don't have a problem going into executive session.
okay, any other discussion, Mr. Stivers?
Not for me, thanks.
Okay, Ms. Malinowski? Mr. Dennington?
Nope.
And I have none. So roll call vote to enter into executive session. Ms. Malinowski,
Aye.
Mr. Healy,
Aye.
Mr. Stivers,
Aye.
Mr. Dennington,
Aye.
and Ms. Braccio, aye. Ms.